welcome back to the channel. You're watching Unbiased Magic Reviews, the most objective magic review channel here on YouTube. And today, by popular demand, I am reviewing James Brown's new download, which is the Ultimate Card to Box. Now, this was put out by Illusionist, and you can pick this up for $20. You'll get over an hour of video instruction where you're going to learn this updated handling on James Brown's effect called Box Clever. Now I'm going to try to give you guys a little background about this and then give you guys my impressions, tell you what you can expect to learn here, and then of course my recommendations. So the original version, Box Clever, was part of James Brown's Professional Opportunist DVD set, where you learn this 5-phase card to box effect. It's an old plot in Magic. The original routine looked like this, where a card was peeked at and then the card would end up underneath the box twice. The first phase, it would happen on the table, then the second phase would be in the spectator's hands, then the whole deck would end up underneath the box, then the selection would end up inside the box, and then the last phase, the whole deck was in the box. And so each phase kind of built up over the other phases. And the original routine, it's like almost 20 years old. It's an excellent routine. You can actually pick it up as a standalone download from Penguin Magic for $10. And I would urge you guys to do that because you're going to learn a lot. You're going to learn a great routine on there. Now, you may remember that a little over a year ago, I did mention this routine when I did my review of Craig Petty's Penguin Live lecture, because he attempted to streamline the routine on his lecture. Basically, he just butchered it, and at that time I questioned why he was teaching other people's material on his lecture anyway. But I would recommend you guys stay away from that. Now, what Illusionist has done here is that they've re-released the effect, basically. And their argument is to try to bring it to more people, although you can still pick up Box Clever from Penguin Magic for $10. You have to ask yourself, did this really warrant a re-release? That's what you have to ask yourself. If you do pick this up, you're going to learn the original version of Box Clever, but unfortunately, James Brown doesn't teach you the peek that he taught you in the original, because he's using a marked deck. So he's going to assume that you're going to use a marked deck. So unfortunately, you're not going to learn that peek, which is probably the most useful thing you're going to learn if you want to do the original routine, unless you're going to use a marked deck, especially if you're going to use just a regular deck of cards. In terms of the new handling, basically James Brown has substituted the first two phases out for two other phases. And does it improve the effect overall? I would argue it doesn't, because the reason is that in the original version, a spectator would peek a card, and then the card would be controlled, but immediately you could show the spectator that there's a card underneath the box. Now, James Brown argues that his updated handling is more impromptu because you don't have to load a card under the box before you begin. But any of us who perform card magic know that when you first begin, nobody's going to notice that you loaded something under the box anyway, because no one is looking for anything yet because you haven't even started. So I think the updated handling really wasn't even warranted. And if you look at that first phase, I don't like it at all. And the reason is because as soon as the card is peeked at, what he does is he does a side steal directly into palm, and he tries to hide it by turning the deck over. Does that really work? I would argue that it's the worst possible time to palm a card right after a card has been peeked, because they're going to be looking at you. They're going to be looking at your hands, and when your hands come together, people are going to look to see what's going on. It makes much more sense to just use whatever your favorite control is at that moment, and then misdirect. Tell the person, like, oh, hold out your hand, and then you hand them the deck for them to cut it, and then you've done one hand top palm that you could load it anywhere you want. In fact, there's so much misdirection at that point that you could load it literally into a wallet if you wanted to. But the issue is that I think that if you're going to be palming a card, especially like that, it makes more sense that you misdirect at the same time while you're doing the palm, so there's nothing to be seen. Because otherwise, the idea that immediately after they peek the card that you're going to go directly into a palm as you're turning the cards over, There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of motion. I mean, you're not fooling anybody doing that. So I really didn't like the first phase at all. I don't think it adds anything to the original effect. The second new phase, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think that's fine. But again, there was nothing wrong with the original second phase that's part of that effect either. And in my recommendations, I'm going to give you guys some recommendations you may want to look at that would probably improve Box Clever as well in a different way. So what I think is, I think that James Brown should have just, you know, told people about this, because these minor tweaks to the original Box Clever are just that. They're minor tweaks. They don't warrant a new product whatsoever. It just doesn't. So that's my thoughts about that. Now, if you do pick this up, what you're going to see is that you're going to learn the original Box Clever, the original 5-phase routine, although you won't learn the peak, because remember that James Brown is using a marked deck. So he's going to assume that you're going to use a marked deck. Then he's going to perform it in the studio. Then afterwards, he's going to perform his updated handling in the studio for one spectator, and then he goes over a detailed explanation of that handling, and then finally they go back to the original handling, but the idea that a spectator is holding a glass and you're putting the box on top of a glass, I don't think that adds anything to the original handling, and I would just do it directly in the spectator's hands. I think that it's even better in their hands if you want to do the original handling. And then finally, at the end of the download, he gives you some extra ideas where a spectator selection could vanish from the deck and end up in the box, just using the last two phases of Box Clever alone as a standalone item. Although most of us probably wouldn't bother with that, and the reason is because we've learned or used so many years that same idea where you pick up the box, you turn it over, and apparently pull out their card from inside the box. I mean, that is probably what's used more commonly than anything else, than going through the trouble of having to try to load the box underneath their nose, because it looks just as good, really. And if you are interested in learning that, you can even find that like on Gregory Wilson's Card Stunts DVD from like 20 years ago is where that is. So that's really what you can expect here. In terms of difficulty of this download, I would say it's like beginner intermediate level. Nothing is really difficult. If you think going from a side steal to a palm is a difficult move, then maybe this is difficult. But I think everything here is very basic. I think angle-wise, you're not going to have any issues at all whatsoever. So my recommendations for you guys is to just stay away from this download, because I don't think it warrants an extra $10 just for those two simple tweaks that he's made to the original routine. I think the original routine is better, and I think that the original explanation is better too, because you're going to learn a peak that he doesn't teach you on this one. So my advice to you guys is just pick up the $10 download from Penguin Magic. You're going to get more for your money. And if you're interested in this plot in Card Magic, my highest recommendation goes to Jeremiah Zuo's book, Confessions of a Magic Fan. That's what you should check out. And the reason is because he has a full write-up of a card under box routine, and I really like how he's cleaned up some of the issues of card under box, where you're able to show the selection in each phase, which is great. So you don't have to even worry about any kind of assumption issues there. The other thing I really liked about it was he goes over this flip over action load move, which is awesome. Because, and the reason I mention this is because in this type of routine, you'll see often where the magician picks up the box, puts it on the deck, just to put the box on the table again before they pick up the selection off of the table. And so Jeremiah Zuo, his idea was very simple, was that you pick up the box and you pick up the selection, and the box is just placed on the table. And that's it. And now the selection is already loaded, or there's already a card loaded under the box at that moment. So it's more of an economy of motion. And for that reason alone, even for just that one move alone, it's worth picking up his book, Confessions of a Magic Fan. So I would highly recommend that you guys do check that out. And if you are looking for an interesting routine of having a signed card end up inside of a box, one routine that you guys may want to check out is Helder Guimaraes' routine, which you can find in his book. It was called reflections. I can't remember the exact name of the routine, but I'll put it here below. But basically a spectator makes 3 selections. One of them is signed. One of the selections ends up under the box. One of the selections ends up under the cellophane. And then the last selection ends up, the one that's signed ends up inside of the box. And it's up until the very end, the spectators can see their signed selection in the spread, vanishes from the spread, ends up in the box, and the spectator can take it out themselves. And it's really the construction of the routine, which is really clever. You really get far ahead of the spectator. I just mention it for completeness sake because you guys may want to check it out. That's why I tell it to you guys. Anyway, that's everything I wanted to go over here on this review. Hopefully this has been helpful to you guys. Again, I would highly recommend you check out Box Clever from James Brown. It's a great routine, the original, and like I said to you guys, you can pick it up from Penguin Magic for $10. I'll leave a link in the description below. As usual, guys, if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. Give me a thumbs up if you find this useful, because that lets me know that this review was helpful to you, and I'll do more reviews on magic like this if you found this helpful. If you have any questions or comments, just leave them for me below. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you on the next review.